Before we start looking at this psalm closely, notice from the heading, if you have the Bible, it says, for the director of music. And that's mean that it would be sung. And that's why I wanted to actually sing it. But most of the psalms, of course, were for singing, but especially these that say, for the director of music. The other thing we learn, of course, is it's a psalm attributed to David. And it's arranged in 4 sections, each of which has 6 verses. And the basic question it asks is, what is God like? I'm using the headings that Derek Tidorp uses in his book on the psalm. So the first 6 verses he entitles, God's perception is wonderful. So I'll read them again in the NIV. O Lord, put this up a bit. O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. You hem me in, behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Although perhaps not many have read it, I think one of the most famous books that people know about is George Orwell's 1984. Has anyone here actually read it? Well done. Only heard about it. But I wonder how much he could imagine what life would be like today, and just how much of our lives is known by the different agencies. Big Brother is watching you is certainly true nowadays, especially since the advent of the computer. If you go downtown, you appear on CCTV. There they are watching you in the office in Grantham. When we go to the stores to shop, they have a record of what we buy, don't they? When we go on social media, it's known what we like, and so they put on the adverts that are appropriate to us. The telephone companies know who we're calling and where we're calling from. The government has all sorts of records about us. And of course, we read about it in China at the moment. They're using face recognition, which means it's more and more difficult for Christians in that country. So I wonder, how do we feel about the authorities knowing so much about us? Do we feel frightened? Do we feel threatened? And then we read this psalm and we discover that God knows all about us, and he knows even more than the authorities. Although all the things that I've just mentioned, he knows far more about us. He knows when we get up and when we sit down. He even knows our thoughts and what we're going to say. Oh, that's frightening, isn't it? Knowing our thoughts. Because he knows what we're going to say, should that make us really careful about what we do say? It's hard, I find, to take it all in, isn't it? As David puts it himself, such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. So, does this make us afraid of God as a result of these words? And the point of this psalm is that we don't need to be. And we have to watch the way we interpret some of the words, because when it says you hem me in behind and before, we could think that's talking about restriction, sort of imprisoning us. But in fact, it's not talking about that at all, but rather that God provides a protective barrier so that nothing can happen to us without God's permission. And then you have laid your hand upon me. It's not about him oppressing us, but rather it's a sign of him putting his arm tenderly on us, his love and his care for us. David realised that God knew him better than he knew himself. God knows us better than we know ourselves. The next 6 verses, entitled God's Presence is Unavoidable. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. God's presence unavoidable. He is everywhere. We can't escape. If we go to the other side of the world, we can't escape him. Even if we go into outer space, we cannot escape him. If we go to the depths, and here the word that is in the Hebrew is Sheol, meaning the grave, or in other words, the afterlife, even then we cannot escape his presence. Even if we try to hide in the darkness, God sees us, because darkness is as light to him. I'm reminded of the passage in Romans 8, the ones that are often used at funerals. Nothing can separate us from the love of God, not even death. Derek Tidball also gives some amazing testimonies about where people have found God after trying to escape from him. He said one was seeking to escape his Christian upbringing and by taking a gap year in New Zealand, but God met him there. Another spent a year in Israel, he said, hardened against Christ. That whole year he spent hardened against Christ. But on his way home, sat next to a Christian on the plane who led him to Christ 35,000 feet up. Another found Christ in a drug rehabilitation centre. God can meet you anywhere. God can meet us anywhere. I don't know about all your testimonies. Perhaps you've got one that's similar. The thing is, it's pointless trying to run away from God because he is everywhere. The third section is God's power is amazing. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. God's power is amazing. God formed us. It says here we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Just think about our bodies. Our design is so complicated. It's like a miracle, isn't it? I cannot believe that our wonderful human bodies are a result of chance, or that we have evolved from amoebas. It seems ridiculous to me, and I find it very hard to understand why other people can't see that. People say, well, what about defects? I believe that the defects are a part of the fall, and we know that one day when Jesus returns, that all will be made perfect. There's certainly going to be no disabilities in heaven. And then we discover that God knows where our lives will lead, as if they're written down in a book. He knows us even before we are born. So the tiny child forming in the womb is seen by God as another person. Which means, of course, abortion is taking away that life. God's loving involvement with our lives starts long before birth. So in these three sections so far, we've seen what can be termed God's omniscience, his all-knowing, his omnipresence, in fact he's everywhere, and his omnipotence, he's all-powerful. Then the fourth section, a final section, is our response to God's greatness. If only you would slay the wicked, O God. Away from me, you bloodthirsty men. They speak of you with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord, and abhor those who rise up against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Well, I think verse 19 and the start of that comes as rather a shock, doesn't it? If only you would slay the wicked, O God, after what's gone before. It's such an abrupt change from all that's gone before. And yet, while disturbing, it's also something that's very real and honest. That's one thing I like about the Psalms. You see the honesty of them. What's happening is that David wants to be on God's side. He wants to say, I'm on your side, God. So in other words, I hate those who hate you. I hate those who misuse your name and rise up against you. But one thing to note is that David is appealing to God to deal with the evil. If only you would slay the wicked. That reminded me of the words, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. We're not to avenge ourselves, or to leave it to God. Of course, Jesus told us, didn't he, to love our enemies and to pray for them. So we should hate the evil, but not the person. And while the impact of all that we've read here then leads to opposition from the enemies, from the wicked, we see that the impact on the righteous ones is very different. It brings humility. Because the final two verses are a prayer that's a very serious prayer, which invites painful surgery. I wonder, are we able to pray this prayer ourselves? Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Let's just spend a moment, shall we, saying that prayer for ourselves. If you can say it in your heart yourselves. I'm just going to read it slowly with a little break. And then if you can respond to God, then do. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me. And lead me in the way everlasting. So why is this psalm my favourite? After attending church for many years, I finally committed my life to Christ after hearing the testimony of a man who explained how we could talk to Jesus at any time, anywhere, that God was always with us and wanted to be involved in every part of our lives. And this psalm just reflects that, doesn't it? God knows you through and through, but he still loves you. He knows me through and through, and yet he still loves me. He pursues us. He wants us as his children. He made us, and he has plans for each one of us. So let's entrust him with the whole of our lives. Let us pray. In our fear, Lord, be our confidence. In our weakness, be our strength. In our panic, be our calm. In our sickness, be our healing. In our confusion, be our anchor. In our insecurity, be our rock. In our darkness, be our light. In our grief, be our solace. In our despair, be our hope. In our storm, be our sunshine. In our night, be our day. In our dread, be our assurance. In our isolation, be our companion. In our need, be our provider. And in our sorrow, be our joy. Lord of all, the joy of those who love you, the peace of those who serve you, the strength of those who seek you, the guide of those who hear you, the hope of those who trust you, the treasure of those who follow you, draw closer to me, that I may draw closer to you. Amen.
Amen.